This video was made possible thanks to the support from my patrons. Pledge today and you can be involved in what videos get made next, and also get early access to them. Link in the description. With the production of Doctor Who The Celestial Toymaker, we've now reached a new transitionary period for the programme. Producer John Wiles had formally left the show, with Innes Lloyd taking his place, and he, along with new script editor Jerry Davis, they had big plans for the show. A new phase of renewal and change, losing the historical stories and producing more ambitious sci-fi. However, it would take a few serials before they could start leaving their mark on the show, as the next 3 stories were holdovers from the previous regime that had already been commissioned. The first one of which was The Celestial Toymaker by Brian Hales, a regular contributor to successful TV dramas like Z Cars, Crossroads, United and more. He had pitched several ideas to the Doctor Who production office, with the story called The Toymaker ultimately getting commissioned, though there were many rewrites and alterations done by the then script editor Donald Tosh, including the potential of the titular Toymaker being another member of the Doctor's race, like the meddling monk. However, the strangest element being pushed forward by Hales and Tosh was the idea of the story being connected to a 1930s play called George and Margaret, a very successful production that revolves around a middle-class London family whose evening is upended after learning that their old friends, George and Margaret, were coming for dinner, with the play ending before the title characters even showed up. Hales and Tosh's idea was for George and Margaret to feature in this story, and they had access to the play's author himself, Gerald Savory, who was now the BBC head of serials. What motivated this creative choice to combine an adult play from the late 1930s to a family sci-fi show almost 30 years later? Why was a Doctor Who story featuring an alien Toymaker the vessel for this crossover? You couldn't pay me to come up with a coherent answer to that. But permission was granted by Savory, until permission was revoked 1 month before filming was due to start, and the actors had already been cast. And now Jerry Davis had to rewrite the 4-parter to accommodate. Worse still, in a last act of spite and rebellion, John Wiles went way over budget for his final story, The Ark, so there was very little money to put together the Celestial Toymaker. The team had to raid the BBC wardrobes and storage departments to put together haphazard improvised sets and costumes, including dressing the Toymaker in the same outfit as Mark Eden in 1964's Marco Polo. But most interestingly of all is that the Celestial Toymaker was initially pitched as the start of a new era of the show by Wiles and Tosh, with the story having the Doctor be invisible and voiceless for the majority of the runtime. Now, this may have partly been wish fulfillment by a stressed producer wanting to silence his leading man, but the idea was initially conceived as a way to recast the role of the Doctor, with the alien traveller regaining his corporeal form at the end, but with a different appearance and played by a new actor. Now obviously this did not happen, and the Invisible Doctor was a way to give Hartnell 2 weeks holiday, but with his health starting to deteriorate and a new creative team wanting to reinvigorate the sci-fi show, Hartnell from this point forward was firmly on borrowed time. But the Doctor is not the only element that's invisible in this serial. No, because parts 1 to 3 of this story are missing from the BBC archives. There are, however, some brilliant high-quality colour photos that still exist, and there's also part 4, which survives due to it being sold to Australia, then moved to New Zealand, then Singapore in the early 1970s. Singapore tried to return it to Australia, and somehow only part 4 was found as a result. It's still a bit of a mystery as to what happened to parts 1 and 3. But we have the loose cannon reconstruction for the missing episodes, which I watched for this video. Now, onto the story. Where last we left the Doctor and companions Stephen and Dodo, they were in the TARDIS and the Doctor had turned invisible. He quickly regains his form though, but the TARDIS has landed outside of the universe, being steered off course by the immortal godlike Toymaker, played by Michael Gough. The Toymaker, with his infinite lifespan, is bored, and he has encountered the Doctor before, so he challenges the group to a series of childlike games. The Doctor is tasked with a Trilogic game which will take over 1,000 moves to finish. Meanwhile, Stephen and Dodo must go from room to room facing the Toymaker's servants in life or death trials. But even if the trio can win the games, can they escape the Toymaker's realm? A lot of what carries this serial is the premise, especially since this really is the first time that Doctor Who has attempted pure surrealism before. The show's first 3 seasons have had pulp sci-fi, historical epics, and even a few mood pieces, but this one wears its abstraction as a badge of honour, with multi-rolling actors playing the Toymaker's servants, with an immortal villain who is far removed from concepts like good or evil, who can make the world based on Lewis Carroll logic for no other reason than just being bored.
You need me? Yes, I'm bored. I love to play games, but there's no one to play against. The beings who call here have no minds, and so they become my toys. But you will become my perpetual opponent. We shall play endless games together, your brain against mine.
You said if I win the game, I can go.
So you can, Doctor, so you can. But I think you will lose.
I think now is a good time as any to talk about this story's big guest star, Michael Gough. Obviously, this was over 2 decades before he played Alfred in the first wave of Warner Brothers Batman movies, or became a frequent collaborator in Tim Burton projects, but even by the mid-1960s, Michael Gough had built up an incredible body of work in Hammer horror films, and had guest starred in several huge TV shows. Obviously, it's subjective, and I'm coloured by a retrospective bias here, but I think Michael Gough is the biggest guest actor the show had employed up to this point, and he's pretty good here. I think he helps to elevate the material, and there's some great scenes between him and William Hartnell. It's just a shame that he doesn't have much of a back and forth with a tangible actor, because the Doctor spends most of this story invisible and mute, but we'll get to that later. He does reek of having effortless power at his fingertips, where he can conjure a conveyor belt of police boxes to disorientate his victims, and has complete autonomy over the realm he's created, most of which is voice controlled.
I think you need help. Go for move 930.
He very rarely raises his voice because, why would he? He's in complete control. Sure, we love our campy, monologuing or over-the-top villains, or our mechanical creatures and alien menaces, but the Celestial Toymaker really is something wholly unique to this era. Now, I think that this approach does limit the type of performance that Michael Gough can give. He is mainly just sitting and standing around. There's not much conflict for him, because he's always in control, but he still does a good job. Though there is the potential issue of dressing the Toymaker in a Chinese Mandarin costume, and then calling him the Celestial Toymaker. The term Celestial being a slur for Chinese people, particularly in America. I'm gonna assume that the word Celestial was used in its more conventional way here, as in being something divine or heavenly, but I can see why some people in the know might get the wrong impression. Anyway, the serial itself is formatted pretty rigidly once all of the pieces are in place. The Doctor is in the Toymaker's main room trying to solve the Trilogic puzzle, a more complex version of the Tower of Hanoi puzzle, and Stephen and Dodo have to make their way through the Toymaker's challenge rooms before the Doctor completes the puzzle, otherwise they will all be trapped there forever. Our human companions end up facing off against the Toymaker's servants, firstly a duo of clowns, Clara and Joey, and they pair up in a game of Blind Man's Bluff. After that, they face off against a trio inspired by playing cards, a king, a queen, and a knave, where they need to use a limited amount of dolls to whittle down the death chairs and figure out which one is safe to sit on. They have to find a key in a Victorian kitchen, face off against ballerina dancers obstructing their path, play hopscotch but the floor is electric, and honestly, considering the Toymaker is meant to be all about games and he can create anything, it's a pretty unimaginative set of tasks. Also, almost all of them end with Steven and Dodo finding a fake TARDIS and realizing they have another game to play. It means that the pacing takes a real hit, as you don't actually know how many games they have to win in their race against the Doctor. If the Toymaker was like, okay, you've got 5 games, the Doctor's got 1,000 moves, best of luck, then that would help. But without that transparency, the stakes are diminished and the whole conceit, it feels laboured. It's also not helped by the proper lack of visuals due to the story's mostly missing status. Loose Cannon did the best they could with the limited material, but there's only so much you can do with a slideshow presentation approach when it comes to Blind Man's Bluff.
Look what he's doing! Cheat! You cheat! Stephen, look out! He can't hear you! The door's not knocking!
Dodo, be careful! You never made me fall that time. What have you done now, you clown, you?
And then, when we get to part 3 and our leads have to find a key hidden in a kitchen, it just descends into bedlam, and frankly, it's unwatchable.
Just you wait, you're gonna be sorry for that! If you think I'm gonna stand for you, throwing my Metrana about, you're very much mistaken!
No, ignore them!
Okay, so the games aren't very inventive, but this problem can be overcome if there's some character work to compensate, and, well, the Celestial Toymaker is a character vacuum, because there's really nothing going on here. Steven and Dodo do a challenge, get frustrated that it's not the end of the story, I relate. The Doctor has moved forward a few hundred moves, fade to credits, and then it's the same thing next week. That's basically it for this whole 4-parter. Now, there's the germ of an idea that the Toymaker's henchmen here are actually previous victims who are trapped in his dimension, but it's not really expanded upon, and because they are such cartoony characters, one of which is clearly not even meant to be a real character, but we'll get to him later.
You know, you're one of my heroes. When I grow up, I want to be just like you. When you grow up? Yes. Well, you look pretty grown up to me already.
That it's hard to actually empathise with them as real people. When I watch the scenes with the King and Queen from a set of playing cards, I don't think that these are people who are trapped playing dress-up. These are just cartoon characters. Dodo ponders the morality of playing these games as she considers their opponents to be living, but Steven does not agree, and that's pretty much it. There's no scene where Dodo maybe self-sabotages because she's overcome with guilt, no scene where Steven perhaps gloats in a victory at the expense of another life and that causes a rift between him and Dodo. There's just no drama here. The conflict comes from much dumber places, like Dodo deciding to sit in one of the death chairs for no reason, and it starts freezing her.
I think I'm turning to ice, Stephen.
Fight the cold. Fight it, Dodo. You've got to get out of that chair. Fight it!
It's no use.
These poorly applied stakes also hinder the Doctor's game, but let's just clarify his position here. So the Toymaker's influence is somehow making the Doctor invisible. At the start of the story, he can't be seen and he can't touch anything, so he needs Steven to open the doors of the TARDIS for him to leave.
Hey, if the Doctor's intangible, why did he need to open the doors? He could have just walked through them.
I found a plot hole! Nurse!
Then the Toymaker takes the Doctor away to play this Trilogic game, but apparently he can't just solve it on his own. If the Toymaker thinks the Doctor is playing too slowly, the Toymaker can jump him ahead to a future move, which is basically him solving the puzzle for his captive. I don't get it either.
You're playing too slowly, Doctor. Go from move 1000. Only 23 moves to go.
Also, it's established early on that the Toymaker and the Doctor actually have a history with each other.
The last time you were here, I hoped you'd stay long enough for a game, but you had hardly time to turn around.
And very wise I was, too, You and your games are quite notorious.
So the Toymaker wants the Doctor because of his alien lifespan and so that they can play games together forever. But in Part 4, it's established that as soon as the Doctor finishes the Trilogic game, the universe that they're in will collapse, the Doctor, Stephen, Dodo and the TARDIS with it.
As the games are over and won by us, everything outside the TARDIS disappears. And if we are there, we disappear also.
But we have won and it hasn't happened yet.
But it will, my dear, the moment I go out there and make the final move of the Trilogic game.
So I'm confused here. Does the Toymaker actually want to play with the Doctor forever? Or does he want to kill him when the puzzle is complete? And if the Toymaker is so bored, why doesn't he properly get involved in a game with him? Trust me, there is nothing more boring than watching someone else play a single-player puzzle game silently. Because the Doctor at one point is able to hack into a video screen early on to talk to Stephen and Dodo, the Toymaker punishes him by just leaving him as a floating hand so he can still play the game. And you know what, as a visual effect, it's pretty good. But then he also removes the Doctor's ability to speak, which means that the majority of this story is just the Toymaker watching a disembodied hand move puzzle pieces 1,000 times in silence. It's just not very engaging. There's even an issue with how the bigger games are filmed. Now, the resources are clearly being stretched with this production, with a slapdash nature to the game rooms, which look like something that even early days Blue Peter would have been embarrassed to film in, but it's not helped by the way that they're shot. Only one episode survives, but we can see that director, Bill Sellers, shoots the TARDIS hopscotch game from mid-shots, meaning you can't see where the players are standing, you can't see how many spaces away from the TARDIS they are. It's just really limp. But to be fair, some genius decided to make the walls of the hopscotch room reflective, so sometimes you can see the camera crew being mirrored in the back of shots. To Bill's credit though, he handles the special effects very effectively, and he does get great performances out of the supporting cast. All of the actors playing the Toymaker's puppets are appropriately grating, yet sometimes creepy and threatening, especially Campbell Singer and Carmen Silvera as the two clowns. These two had already been cast as George and Margaret before filming, only for their roles to be drastically retooled at the last minute, but they clear that hurdle. They do a great job as scary clowns. It's especially creepy that when they lose the game in part 1, they just collapse where they are, with Clara having fallen on the game buzzer, causing it to forever ring out. A really great moment. But like I mentioned earlier, they also multi-role. They play the King and the Queen of Hearts in part 2. And this is the moment where Doctor Who decides to drop in another racial slur. This one, however, is much more unambiguous.
Well, then you must have picked one at random.
Ah, of course, random.
And that, folks, is why this episode will be edited if it ever gets a home media release. Who does this guy think he is? Jeremy Clarkson?
Eeny, meeny, miny, moe. When he squeals, let him go. Eeny, meeny, miny, moe.
Please be assured I did everything in my power to not use that word. And that I'm sitting here begging your forgiveness for the fact that obviously my efforts weren't quite good enough.
But another cast standout is Peter Stevens, who plays the Knave of Hearts and a kitchen boy, but then he reappears at the end of part 3 and throughout part 4 as Cyril.
Yeah!
A grown-up man in schoolboy clothing who challenges Stephen and Dodo to hopscotch. And this is a great performance, he is so much fun. Peter Stevens is brilliant at embodying a delinquent child in an adult's body, with his sharp, incisive insults and unpredictable behaviour. However, it seems like the actor got a bit carried away with his ad-libbing on set, because at the end of part 3, he says this.
Hello, remember me? I'm Cyril, known to my friends as Billy.
Now this aside was apparently not scripted, but it got the BBC into a lot of trouble. You see, this episode recycled a lot of costumes from the BBC's wardrobe department, and with this, they ended up dressing Peter Stevens up as a character called Billy Bunter, a character invented in the early 20th century by Charles Hamilton under the pen name Frank Richards for boys' comic strips. He's basically a precursor to Dennis the Menace or Bart Simpson. Now, when Part 3 was broadcast, the Frank Richards estate caught wind of Cyril's inclusion and his nickname of Billy, combined with his outfit, the glasses, the general behaviour, and they were not happy, resulting in the BBC having to issue an on-air apology during the credits of Part 4, which is something the BBC had never done before and, to my knowledge, have never done since.
For any apparent similarity between the characters of Cyril and Billy Bunter, the BBC makes its apologies to the Frank Richards estate.
Anyway, Cyril would get his comeuppance though, because, well, let's just see how the game ends.
A 5! Hooray! I won! Yarrow! Hurrah for me! Yarrow! Ah!
Now, when watching this episode for the first time, I just assumed that Cyril just slipped and spontaneously combusted for no reason. But Stephen explains that Cyril slipped on a powder trap that he had placed himself and just must have forgotten about. It was then when I rewatched the episode, I realised that I missed this incredibly short and, quite frankly, poorly framed and vague cutaway of Cyril setting the trap. It's literally blink and you'll miss it. But my headcanon is that Cyril just got too excited and exploded. We even see his doll's charred corpse. This is a lot. But speaking of out-of-nowhere resolutions, Stephen and Dodo win their games and get to the TARDIS. The Doctor is one move away from winning, but if he makes the play, they'll all be killed as the universe collapses. Stephen offers to sacrifice himself, which is a great little moment, but the Doctor obviously can't allow him to do that. Then he remembers how the Toymaker used his voice to command the game board to leap to different moves. And then...
Go to move 1023.
Go from move 1023.
Master switch!
So, the Doctor, out of nowhere, just does a perfect vocal impression of the Toymaker, and that's how he wins. It's as unearned as it is random. There had to be a better way to resolve this, but to be honest, I was just kind of glad to be out of here, to be honest. There's just not a lot to the Celestial Toymaker. There's moments of inventive imagery, the cast are great, but it's really lacking in clear stakes and rules throughout. Also, the lack of resources is really apparent throughout all 4 episodes. It's such a bare-bones production, but that could have been salvaged if the script had anything interesting on its mind, but it just doesn't. There's hardly anything for the Doctor to do, and his absence in parts 2 and 3 really is felt, though I like to think in part 4, when he does turn up, he swears at the Toymaker.
What have you done? Stop meddling with my ship!
Peter Purvis is doing a good job as the stern, I've had it up to my striped jumper with all of this bullshit companion, and while Dodo does do some stupid stuff here, Jackie Lane is doing her best with the material. Honestly, this is not something unique to Dodo. If Susan or Vicky were in this serial instead, they would be making the same mistakes, because, well, that's just the current nature of the younger female companion role. Now that's where this review should end, But there's been some interesting developments in 2023 regarding this serial's legacy. You see, while parts 1 to 3 are missing and there's no official plans to animate the story at the time of uploading this review, fans can actually watch an animated part 1 of the Celestial Toymaker on YouTube. Animator Mel, otherwise known as Dinopuff, spent several months doing a 3D fan animation of this story, and guys, it's really good. Obviously, there are advantages to this style of animation that weren't afforded to the original production, like colour and making the sets look endless, selling the idea of this being an abstract dimension, but the great use of camera angles, the stellar storyboarding, harsh lighting, it's not only a great animation, but I think it improves on the source material and it elevates the episode. Towards the end of part 1, when the clowns have been caught cheating at Blind Man's Bluff since Joey has been running around the obstacle course in a blindfold that he can actually see through, he has to do the course again, and as he's trying and failing to maintain his balance on the tightrope walk, the camera zooms into his and Clara's faces, and you can see that they're crying. It's such a short moment, but it expands on the idea that these are also victims of the Toymaker. They didn't cheat at the game to try and be malicious to Steven and Dodo. They're not evil. They're also desperate to escape his world. God knows how long they've already been here for, and they'll do anything to accomplish that. And I'm delighted to say that I was able to speak with Dinopuff about his animated production. And I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Mel, aka Dinopuff, who has animated part 1 of the Celestial Toymaker. How are you doing, Mel?
I'm doing very well, thank you very much.
It was you who reached out to me asking if I wanted to talk with you about this, and honestly, I would have reached out to you as well. So I'm glad that this is something that we're both interested in having this conversation, because this is
very much so.
This is a superb animation. I think it's absolutely terrific. It's ambitious, and I think it actually elevates the first episode of the Celestial Toymaker. But I'd like to ask firstly, what got you into animation, and also why the Celestial Toymaker, of all missing stories that you could have animated?
Animation as a whole wasn't really something that I wanted to get into. It was something I was sort of thrown into by a couple of friends of mine, but then once I actually tried it, I really started to enjoy it. But that was all with 2D and such, and Celestial Toymaker did actually start as 2D. But then it eventually became 3D when I realized that was far more efficient and just generally looked way better, because since I had all this extra time, it could look way better. Originally, I wasn't actually going to animate Celestial Toymaker. It was a audio drama story from Big Finish, because I was such a massive fan of the Big Finish, and Big Finish were amazing because whenever I was animating, I could listen to them and I could be entertained, and it was brilliant because I wouldn't be distracted from the animation, and it meant I could just keep on animating, and I was in a way just grateful for that, and so I wanted to animate one of their stories. And I thought, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be amazing to post a brilliant animation online of the first person to animate a full Big Finish story out there? And then bloody Josh Snares did it first. So when that came out, it was just like, oh, right, that's interesting. There's rumors of Celestial Toymaker coming out in the new 60th anniversary. I've got an idea.
I think it's actually a pretty decent idea for an animated recreation, because there is still one episode, so there is a bit of like visual reference to work with. There's a lot of great high-res colour photos, so you've got Steven in his striped jumper, you've got Dodo in whatever on earth that outfit was from the 1960s.
Yeah, it was an odd one, but it was quite nice.
Yeah, I think it's very memorable because it's so 60s. It's very but it's also a story with clearly being put together like with a wish and a dream, shoestring budget, because the last serial John Wiles had overspent on the arc out of spite. So for the Celestial Toymaker, because you're doing 3D animation for it and in color as well. So when putting together like storyboarding for the Celestial Toymaker animation, were you wanting to maybe do something quite faithful to maybe the telesnaps or the camera scripts, or was this like, I can go abstract, I can be a bit more experimental with it?
With Toymaker, more or less, I tried to look at what the writer Brian Hales was trying to go for with the story, and at points taking my own ideas, I'll admit, where there's points of the story that I absolutely loved, and I wanted to push those to its absolute furthest it could in the animation, which is why there's a lot of edits I made to the original audio. Heresy. It's almost the idea that it's this expansive void, this realm, and the dollhouse being a massive dollhouse that's completely unusual. And of course, that idea of something being massive and unusual, that let's really make it massive and unusual. Let's not just make it a bit big, which was what it was like in the original.
So a few technical questions about the animation. So what was like the software that you used? Because I'm not an animator, but I'm sure you've already had a lot of people asking, what did you animate this on? Like, was this motion capture? Where did you get your models from, etc.? What's the technical explanation behind the wizardry?
Drum roll for the expensive technology. I use Blender. The free 3D application. I used Blender with a motion capture setup which was Rococo. That was expensive though, unfortunately.
So for the animation, how long did it take from start to finish?
Actually, animating it took 4 months, but the preparing for that took a lot longer. A lot longer. I think, it was about 10 months ago that I actually started it, and I think the animation, I released the first clip 6 months, so 4 months pre-production. Oh, God. Wow. That was longer than I thought. But, I really wanted to get the style looking good first. So many animation attempts and new styles, changes, tweaks as it went along. I remember the eyes was a big thing because originally the eyes were just spheres, and basically they were just colored in and such, and basically I looked at it and it looked like they were dolls because eyes don't work like that. They go in slightly, so I had to redo a massive portion of the animation just to get these eyes right. Oh gosh,
that's the difficulty with animating classic Doctor Who and doing these recreations, because you can do a cartoonish version of Dodo and Stephen and the Doctor, but they were real people played by they're real characters, real actors, so there's an expectation.
That is definitely something that I found I don't really like with a lot of the BBC animations, with what they're trying to achieve with the animations, where if you're trying to bring back the story, then you want a realistic design. Problem with realistic designs, they're really difficult to animate.
Yeah. For the animation, there's a couple of editorial decisions, if I'm using that word correctly, where towards the final act of the episode, the Toymaker comes in to reset the game board, which is something that does not happen in the original version. Yes. So what inspired those creative decisions?
That's the one that most people notice. That's the one that loads of people notice for the edits, but there are tons of those edits. And as I said before, I was really wanting to push what I love about the story and what I think that Brian Hales may have been going for. He may not have. I don't know him personally for some reason. But one of the things was definitely that I wanted to make it sinister. That is something for sure. I really wanted to make this a sinister story, and I wanted you to feel really sorry for these clowns, because in the original story, they're more or less just henchmen of the Toymaker. They're just, yes, we shall defeat Stephen and Dodo because that is what you want. No other reason. And it's like, no, these are people. These are people that have been turned into clowns that are forced to be here, and that's horrifying. And so I wanted to emphasize feeling sorry for them, and by doing that, at the end I accidentally made it seem like Stephen was a murderer, because originally Stephen's the one that makes them do it again, because I'd made so much sympathy towards them. Since Stephen's making them redo the course, it was not good. So that is why I brought in the Toymaker, and it worked fabulously well because it also made him incredibly sinister.
That's one of the reasons I think it elevates the original source material. There's the great close-up shot as Joey's balancing on the beam at the end when they're both crying, which is something that they couldn't have done in the original televised version, because they don't have the option of camera angles and such. But decisions like that gave it a really extra horror element to it. I thought it was really effective.
Wow, thanks very much. Glad that worked.
No, I noticed people in the comment section as well pointing out that moment. So it was a detail that definitely went noticed by the people who watched it.
The initial praise was still the praise now is amazing. It feels so amazing that I made something that people really, really enjoy, and I'm so happy about that. But the thing that I'm always aware of is when you see someone put up an animation on YouTube and such, you don't really want to be harsh and say, oh no, it was terrible and all these kind of things. You don't want to put that in a comment section because that's mean. Yeah.
I don't know, comment sections can be pretty mean sometimes.
They can, but when it's on a video that you can clearly see that the person's tried to put effort in, they will generally try to just skirt around the details. And with this in mind, I immediately tried to seek down forum rooms where they might be talking about it, where they didn't think I'd find it. And then I found the critics. Thank you. Yes. So yes, I literally was just hunting for critical information because I wanted to know what is it that you didn't like so I can get better. There was one forum room that I found, and I will say this, they just did not hold back on the critical at all, and I was loving every single message of it. There was just one of them that was basically just taking snapshots and just sending it, and they're like, literally, look at this, Dodo's arm just seems dirty. I just wanted to take a quick bath and such before she comes back on the screen. And I'm like, thank you. Now I know I'm not going to do that again.
And now you know to clean up Dodo if you ever do part 2 and 3.
Yeah. It was just, I did lots of cross-hatching all over because I just had, I don't know what I was doing with that cross-hatching. I just went far too far at points. And yeah, it looked like just dirt at a lot of occasions. So that's not being done anymore. Yay.
Well, it seemed like very stylized lighting. That's sort of my impression of it. But if you're able to talk about what you're up to next, whether it could be parts 2 and 3, which I know seems a bit premature. Like you've just done part 1. Oh, now let's do all of the rest of it. So what are you up to next for the animation?
I can say, and I definitely need to say, that I cannot do part 2 and 3, unfortunately. If I could, though, I'd probably do 2 and 3 and 4, if I'm honest, because I think that 4th episode could do with a lot of edits too. So after Toymaker, or actually after one of the clips that I released on Toymaker, some people got in touch with me saying about a animation project that they had in mind. When we got talking, it was a amazing idea that they had in mind. Absolutely brilliant idea with so much atmosphere and amazing character work. I just could not resist it, and so that is what I'm currently working on. And so far, wow, I am very happy. I am very happy, and no more dirty Dodo arms. So that's good. We've changed up the style, so it won't have any more of that wild cross-hatching anymore. I'm going to say that we do have a release date that should align with a certain occasion that might be coming up in Doctor Who. There's a strange thing that involves a diamond that they're putting on all these different screens. That I don't know what that's all about.
Yeah, it's
kind of trying to release it for.
It's passed me by personally. I don't really get
it has me too. Yeah, there's not much talk about it these days, but it's expected to be somewhere around there. We're trying to get it out for.
Wonderful stuff. Mel, thank you so much for your time and for this conversation. And also just, I obviously do not speak for the community, but personally, thank you very much for bringing us what was, a few months ago, a thoroughly missing episode. And now there's actually a viable, watchable and enjoyable alternative to watching a missing part of Doctor Who history. So thank you very much for that.
Not a problem at all. I'm very happy that people enjoyed it.
Thanks so much to Dinopuff for his time, and if you wanted to watch the animated part 1 of the Celestial Toymaker, there's a link to their channel in the description below. Now, the Toymaker, due to his high-profile casting in this story and the limitless potential of the villain, has made several returns in expanded media. The first encounter between the Doctor and the Toymaker was expanded upon in the BBC Books novel Divided Loyalties. There was even supposed to be a Doctor Toymaker rematch as part of the initial plans for the season 23 opener in the mid-1980s in the Nightmare Fair, where the Toymaker would have set up a series of deadly games in Blackpool and would face off against the Sixth Doctor in an adventure penned by Graham Williams. However, these plans were scuppered due to the 1985 hiatus, and it's unknown as to whether or not Michael Gough would have reprised his role. The story was adapted into a Target novel, and also a Big Finish audio starring David Bailey as the Toymaker.
Greetings, Doctor.
You? The Toymaker?
I'm gratified that you still remember me.
Wouldn't opening the door have been easier than magicking the whole wall away with one of your parlour tricks?
Ow! As you've just discovered, Doctor, the wall is still very much there. I have merely rendered it invisible. Forgive these tedious formalities, but I feared your impetuous nature might bring us both to regrettable harm without some form of restraint.
Brevity is the soul of wit.
So I believe, but I've been waiting so long for this meeting. I've had plenty of time to make up 5 words where one would do.
And this is another of your absurd games, is it?
No, not absurd. I do have plenty of those, but this one is in deadly earnest.
But yeah, there's been plenty of comic book appearances and Big Finish plays to feature the Toymaker, and then in 2023, for the show's 60th anniversary, the rumour mill started spreading the idea of Neil Patrick Harris playing the Toymaker opposite David Tennant as the 14th Doctor. We see in the trailers he's based in a London toy shop, he's dressed like an old-fashioned Toymaker, and also spotted on location are these decorations of a sad clown. Notice any similarities? But we'll find out soon if the Toymaker has made a return to Doctor Who after almost 60 years. But even if not, the fact that fans have latched onto this idea shows that there's definitely an appetite for his return. Just maybe don't get too invested in that original serial. It's noteworthy for having multiple slurs, and it almost got the BBC in massive legal trouble, but apart from that, it's just not that interesting. But the story does end with the Doctor eating one of Cyril's sweets and keeling over in pain. What's happened? Has he been poisoned? Is he choking? What's going on? Well, join me next time as the TARDIS lands in 1881 Tombstone, Arizona. It's the Wild West and the eve of the most famous gunfight at the OK Corral. Let's see if Doctor Who can capture the epic, mythic spirit of an American Western in The Gunfighters. I'll see you then. Hey folks, thank you so much for watching this review of Doctor Who The Celestial Toymaker. You know what to do at this point. If you enjoyed this review, leave any comment down below to appease the almighty algorithm, hit that like button and subscribe for more upcoming Doctor Who related videos. Thank you so much to Mel, aka Dinopuff, for sharing his process when it came to his brilliant animation for The Celestial Toymaker Part 1. You'll be able to find a link to that in the description below. Also, while you're in the description, be sure to check out my Patreon, because it's one of the ways I'm able to keep the lights on here, keep this operation afloat. If you become a patron, you can get these videos early, get access to a Mr. TARDIS Discord server, get your name in the credits here, like these beautiful gits, and I'd like to give a shout out to these particular patrons: Adam Grattan, Alex Dry, Ben Langdon, Callum Baird, Chiba City Blues, Dan the Dreamer Shill, Daniel Davis, Darren Carver-Bowsiger, Dean Jones, Dylan Whitaker, Finley Rude, Ginger Animator, Jack D. Evans, Joseph Adams, Lard Dragon Ezra, Leela, Maria Bergman, Marianne Mogensen, Mario Fanboy 15, Michael Serrano, Miranda Logan, Nate Harris, Palex, Pat Andrews, Randall Sprinkle, Raven Woods, Reese Lloyd, Ross, Ryan Duncan, Samuel Whitaker, The Evil Dalek, The Brit Sniper, Toby Loxton, and Will. Thanks to those folks, thanks to all of my patrons, and thanks to you for watching this video. I'll see you next time.